you say slasher movies, that's when the killer became the star.
Don't go in there!
Halloween, it happens to be the Cadillac of slasher movies.
You don't know what it is that makes Michael Myers go, her.
Psycho was the first time I was aware of the editing.
The assembly of pieces of film to create fright.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the most important movies.
That ratchets up horror to a whole other level.
Yeah. That's the one that defined me.
Sometimes you just want to sit down and watch Jason take out a lot of stupid teenagers.
There are a number of pictures where you're able to actually take your deepest, most antisocial impulses for a walk.
Horror became a dirty word in the late 70s, early 80s.
These films hate women.
55% of that audience was women.
They're the final girls. That's who you identify with.
There's the moment in Halloween where I'm standing behind this house. I don't know anybody yet. I'm 19 years old and saying to myself, what am I doing? How do I do this? And then you hear, all right, everybody, here we go. We're rolling. Camera's rolling. And I have to start screaming. And I had never screamed in my life. Who screams? Who screams?
I suppose for a lot of people who grew up on Friday the 13th, Halloween, Scream, horror equals gore.
You have the idea that all horror films are slasher films, which is wrong, and then you have the idea that slasher films are purely misogynistic and that the only people who watch them are men, and that's also wrong.
The most extreme form of horror films, slashers, have been vilified since they first came on the scene. But they have also been tremendously popular. The worst of them can still be entertaining. The best of them tell us brutal truths about ourselves, our fears, and our secret desires.
In 1974, Bob Clark comes in with Black Christmas. That is the first POV of slasher, girls in the sorority house, over the holiday. That becomes sort of the precursor to John Carpenter, who comes in with Halloween.
Halloween technically is a slasher movie, but it happens to be the Cadillac of slasher movies.
Halloween also made horror films mainstream. It was one of the ones that people who don't like horror movies still watch.
Halloween is remarkably effective. From the opening long take of a child looking through a mask.
A young boy murders his sister and is put away in a mental institution. And 16 years later, he escapes and comes back to the town and to the scene of the crime.
And over the course of Halloween Day, Michael Myers slowly lets his presence known to Laurie Strode.
This is rare in a lot of horror films, actually like a likable lead. You know, in Friday the 13th, you want most of those actors to die. You don't want Jamie Lee Curtis to die. You want Jamie Lee Curtis to survive.
I think it all had to do with emotion. John said very clearly what he wanted. He said, I really want her vulnerability. It's why he cast me, apparently. And I didn't really understand that at 19. And I learned what John meant when I went and saw the movie in Hollywood at a theater. There's the sequence where Laurie Strode leaves the babysitting house. And there's this long walk between the two houses. And of course, the entire audience started screaming, "Don't go in there!" And that's when I understood what John was going for, was that you cared enough about her that you would tell her, don't do this.
So much of horror is about mood, atmosphere, and cinematic style. John Carpenter using the wide screen and the Panaglide camera, starting with Halloween, it's something that makes the film that much more effective.
When I met John, I was immediately impressed that he wanted to use the camera to tell the story rather than just a recording device. The Steadicam, the Panaglide at the time, was one of those tools that John and I looked at as being a key technique, moving the camera fluidly.
You didn't know where Michael Myers was. You know, you saw him outside, and then you'd be in making out, you know, on a couch, and it's like, okay, he's out there someplace.
Like, you'll watch a lot of these movies and you're not scared anymore. But when you think like Michael Myers, like, I was freaked out for years. Just the idea of some just dude popping out of places and murdering you real quick.
Michael Myers is the human being that's actually a wolf wearing a human face. You know, the human that just ain't human.
What you saw in the sequels was an attempt to kind of shoehorn in other characters or other mythologies just to make it more interesting.
In Halloween 2, they make it that Laurie and Michael Myers are brother and sister.
That Strode girl, that's Michael Myers' sister.
He's not her brother. She's not his sister. That's just bull. Nobody was coming from that point of view when they were making the first one. And what makes the first one so good is the fact that you don't know what it is that makes Michael Myers go, her.
Halloween was one of the first films to really initiate the final girl as a trope. A main character who's a woman who is first a victim and ultimately a survivor who fights back. It's a formula that really worked. And it's become so common that I think most people don't even think about it.
All right, upstairs, get Lindsay, lock the bedroom door. Do as I say!
It's pure. There's something very pure and clean about it. Innocence and danger coming together with that music and that camera work and the performances is why I think we're still talking about it today.
John Carpenter's Halloween launched the slasher boom of the 80s. Its influence is still felt today, but it didn't come out of nowhere.
Good evening. I have some news that will delight you. Murder is not dead.
Starting with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho in 1960, we started seeing a new approach to horror. It was the horror that didn't come out of some grotesque radioactive anomaly, but it could be lurking next door. A nice young man like Norman Bates could be the new Frankenstein, the new Dracula.
Do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
Hitch always thought it was a comedy. He always claimed that.
The content as such was, I felt, rather amusing.
My mother, what is the phrase? She isn't quite herself today.
But it's very perverted and very sick.
There's hangers in the closet and stationery with Bates Motel printed on it in case you want to make your friends back home feel envious. And the, over there.
The bathroom.
Yeah.
One of the big things that I think to this day was still shocking about Psycho was you kill the protagonist 40 minutes into the movie. Even knowing that the shower scene was coming, I was like, wait, she can't be the one who gets killed.
There's so much movie left.
Psycho raised terror to a level that I had never seen anyway, because it was neo-realistic. Before Psycho, that was not imaginable, that level of terror. Psycho and Hitchcock brought terror into your shower.
Psycho was the first time I was aware of the editing. And how your mind gets tricked and what you see off camera.
This process of frightening is done by means of a given medium, the medium of pure cinema. The assembly of pieces of film to create fright.
That shower scene is one of the most iconic pieces of cinema ever to be created. So much so that it's burned in people's brains who haven't even seen the movie. People know that Bernard Herrmann score, the you know, kids grow up like doing that with that sound, not knowing what it's from. Like, talk about having made a cultural impact.
Bernard Herrmann's score to the film was very dramatic, very propulsive. It's virtually impossible for a horror composer not to have to wrestle with the Psycho score. You cannot avoid it. You have to deal with it.
In 1960, I'm sure people regarded the shower scene in Psycho as having gone too far. Like, Alfred Hitchcock's gone too far this time. But it's indelible. They're indelible images, and they're, like, forever, like, sort of in your brain, and, like, people have bad dreams thinking about those movies.
John Carpenter, you know, was greatly influenced by Psycho, even to the point of casting Janet Leigh's daughter, Jamie Lee Curtis, in the lead role.
Ironic that it's same genre, same family. Obviously, it was the biggest thing in her life, as I know that Halloween is mine. So when I jokingly say to you, Halloween actress dies, that's what it will say. Nothing else. Just like my mom, Psycho actress dies.
Because of Hitchcock, people will accept cinema first in a thriller in a way they won't accept it in a love story, in a way they won't accept it in a period drama, in a way they won't accept it in almost most every other genre. Because Hitchcock taught people to be thinking of cinema first, we're just naturally okay with the camera taking off and doing things.
I think it's fair to say that Psycho was a turning point. Certainly in American filmmaking and Hollywood filmmaking, because there was no one more establishment than Alfred Hitchcock. And there was no turning back. There was no turning back.
Psycho influenced every horror film to come, and it paved the way for a new kind of movie monster, the chainsaw-wielding serial killer.
If you think about the landmarks, Psycho and Halloween, clearly the bridge between the two is Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah. Out of every movie that we've talked about, that's the one that defined me. Like, that's everything I wanted in a movie and everything I ever wanted to do in movies. It was just disgusting and nasty, and that redneck thing.
Relentless.
That movie just changed the way I thought about movies.
Yeah.
Instantly.
Decided to rewatch Texas Chainsaw Massacre like a month ago. I watched it 8 times.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the most important movies to me of all horror films.
You walk into a movie called Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you expect the worst, and you get it. It was incredibly potent and visceral. There was an imagination, a dark imagination that had no limits.
The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths.
It just starts with that great, like, dreadful, somber narration at the beginning of the story.
The events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
So right off the bat, you're thinking, wow, is this based on a true story? And then they flash this date.
It really feels like you were dropped into watching something happen for real.
This heat is just driving me crazy. I don't know if I can take much more. The condition.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the first one where I thought they were real people.
Yeah.
I never looked at them as actors. You don't see any on-screen violence. It's all implied.
The hook.
When he
puts
picks
her
her
Pam
up
in the meat hook.
and he's holding her over the hook.
And you came out of that movie
Something
certain
about
that
it.
you remembered, oh yeah, remember you see the hook go through her.
Yeah.
But your mind just put it all together.
Stop.
Texas Chainsaw is inspired by the Ed Gein story from Wisconsin.
It was a crime that shocked the small town of Plainfield, Wisconsin. Edward Gein accused of killing a woman, then gutting her body like a slaughtered deer.
Toby told me that when he was a kid, they would tell him the story of this guy, Ed Gein.
He would use those body parts and bones to make lampshades and other furniture. He would also wear dead female body parts.
And so they used to use Ed Gein as a cautionary tale. Don't be bad, or Ed Gein will come for you.
Someone once said, before Tobe Hooper, there had been plenty of films about psychopaths. But when you saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it was the first time you saw a film that seemed like it had been directed by a psychopath.
Toby, he had a sweetness to him. At the same time, he would try to rip your head off if you messed with the frame of his movie.
If you'll pardon my French, they didn't give a about what people thought about the movie they were making. The conditions of making that movie were so primitive. I mean, these guys, they borrowed 16mm Airflex cameras from the University of Texas under the hottest, worst conditions. It was like 120 degrees, and they were like, let's go out there and stir it up.
It was not a pleasant experience for anyone, and it's reflected in the film. I don't think Tobe Hooper set out to make a movie about Vietnam, but he could not help but reflect the rebellion that was going on.
Subsequent investigation.
The times were political, and the times were, steeped in Vietnam.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a very American story and in some ways a capitalistic story.
The place where they shoot the cattle in the head with that big air gun thing.
Oh, that gun's no good.
I was in there once with my uncle.
What Texas Chainsaw Massacre is really about is a family of dispossessed workers.
With a sledge. See, that was better. They died better that way.
Because of automation and loss of jobs, they no longer have the means, to earn a living for themselves.
With the new way people put out of jobs.
The oppressed working class turn the tools of their trade back upon their former employers, the chainsaw, the hammer, and so on. But it's also tied in with psychic repression because people love the meat on their plate but don't want to think about how it gets made. And by substituting the teenagers for the cattle and the former dispossessed workers enacting revenge against them, it's a kind of unrepression both of meat itself and of working class labor.
Toby called that movie a $60,000 flare he shot up from Austin. And it's in the Museum of Modern Art now. It's a classic, but it's unmatched after that. I mean, that ratchets up horror to a whole other level.
Texas Chainsaw, Halloween, and Psycho opened the gates for a new kind of horror. But the slasher film as we know it was truly born with the most successful horror franchise of all time. Friday the 13th. When you think of Friday the 13th, you think of dead teenagers and the unstoppable Jason Voorhees.
Growing up when I did, we all watched Friday the 13th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 8 was horrible. But in terms of character names, Jason Voorhees, it oozes evil.
I believe that I have murdered more people on film than any actor in history. I played Jason in 4 of the Friday the 13th films. There's a lot more to playing a character like Jason than throwing the mask on and, you know, walking around threateningly. Because 2 of the major tools an actor uses are their facial expressions and their voice. So now you take away both of those by making him silent and putting a mask on him. So I always was conscious of Jason never looking awkward or off balance or weak. I would never look down to see where I was walking because I thought it weakened the character. My favorite Jason kill, which was my favorite all-time kill for a long time, was the sleeping bag from Part 7. I put my heart and soul into that character and loved playing it.
Name the killer in Friday the 13th.
Jason! Jason! Jason!
I'm sorry. That's the wrong answer.
Jason is synonymous with Friday the 13th, but he's barely seen in the original film. The rest of the formula, though, was in place.
Friday the 13th is a story about a group of camp counselors who've come up to set up a camp.
Well, come on, let's go. I thought we had 2 weeks.
And have been sort of targeted by a mysterious killer.
One or 2 or 3 of them get picked off, and you say, oh my goodness, anybody could go at any time.
Oh! Something's wrong with Ned.
That was, I think, part of the secret to the suspense that we were able to create.
Must be my imagination.
We needed somebody that knew a lot more than we did about how to pull off a special effect. You want to stab somebody with a knife. How do you do it? You can't just get a rubber knife and start, you know, going at people. And we were fortunate enough to run into a guy named Tom Savini. And he just couldn't wait to get involved. And he had such wonderful, positive energy.
Kevin Bacon was sitting upright underneath the bed. Only his head came through the bed. So I'm actually pushing the arrow through the fake chest and neck. And my assistant was pumping the blood. Now, while he was pumping the blood, the tubing came off the blood pump. And during the take, he grabbed it and blew through it, which caused the nice gurgling of the blood. So it was a happy accident that made the effect, you know, so much better.
What makes Friday the 13th a classic is the reveal of Mrs. Voorhees.
Well, I'm Mrs. Voorhees, an old friend of the Christies.
Everyone's trying to survive as they're being knocked off one by a killer that they don't know, and then you reveal it's the mother of this drowned boy.
You see, Jason was my son.
A mother was driven mad by her child drowning and seeing the world ignore it and go by and think that they can just restart and go on with their lives. The manifestation of grief is actually very poetic and relatable.
we started to hear some of the score that Harry was writing for the first Friday the 13th. And this kept coming up.
You remember a scene at the very end where Mrs. Voorhees, Betsy Palmer, rest her soul, dear Betsy, we hear her son go,
Kill her, Mommy. Kill her.
and that's what kicked it off for me. I went, she hears voices in her head. I went up to a microphone and went, and then it came out, and literally became the signature of that series, the sound that, what they call the Jason sound.
Look what you did to him!
I remember thinking the movie was over. You remember she was on the lake? And I thought I legitimately like, oh, the movie's over. Whew, she's at the boat. He jumped out that water, I lost it. I don't even know how I fell for that. To this day, was the loudest I ever screamed in my life.
The boy, Jason.
Jason?
Nobody knew that was going to become a franchise, but it was certainly easy to replicate.
My biggest regret is putting the bag over his head. So then doing part 3, this guy we had hired as a 3D expert was also a hockey player. And I was trying to figure out, I wasn't going to do the bag again. What are we going to do? And one day he walked into my office with a goalie mask. Said, how about this? It was perfect. It was immediately, that was going to be great.
I don't understand how in the first one he's like an 11-year-old who jumps out of the lake, and then he's built like a WCW wrestler. I don't understand what happened where he suddenly got all jacked.
After the first movies and the subsequent sequels became, who are these, awful kids that we sort of hate and we can't wait for Jason to take them out.
I've always thought that the slasher films of the 1980s didn't really work as horror fiction, but they worked pretty well as slapstick comedies. And the reason for that is, the characters are never allowed to be anything except one-dimensional types. You've got a gang of teenagers, you've got the jock, you've got the stoner, you've got the slut, you've got the virgin. You never care about them, you never fall in love with them. And so when the serial killer starts knocking them off one by one, you laugh instead of recoil in horror because he's actually more of a personality than they are.
With the success of Friday the 13th and the success of Halloween, producers were ravenous to find material and knowing that, oh, well, this is the formula.
One of the byproducts of success of Friday the 13th and a few other movies was that people on the outside looking in saying, oh, they killed 10 people and they made a lot of money. We'll kill 20 people and we'll make a lot more than that.
By the early 80s, slasher movies glutted the market. Audiences loved them, but they also inspired outright hatred. Where some saw harmless entertainment, others saw a threat to society.
Oh, come on, baby. Light my fire. Bet I will.
I got to tell you something. The worst horror movie I ever saw was great.
Yeah,
Okay?
it's true.
That's the way that I am, because I go in there and I say, what am I going to see? I don't know. A movie that's PG-13, that's a horror movie, it's got to be scary in some way that's really artistic. Once you get to R or once you get to unrated, you're saying, I don't know what I'm going to see. I got one word for you, maniac.
Maniac is one of my favorite movies, and I had a feeling you'd like it.
Maniac,
Which
oh,
is
of
why,
course.
as a gift for you, I brought you a Maniac figure.
We did not rehearse this, folks. Look.
A Maniac action
I'm
figure.
so excited, I almost dropped it. It's a Maniac bloody scalp.
Isn't that sweet? Yeah.
It really is. I mean, I don't know how to thank you for that.
Maniac is about a guy named Frank Zito who's a very oddball character who stalks young women and he scalps them and he takes their scalps home and he puts them on these mannequins, and it is here he sort of struggles with this relationship he had with his mother.
I won't ever let them take you away from me.
It's a very minimalist look at what happens inside the mind of a serial killer.
I mean, the original Maniac is mean, but it's actually really powerful and, thanks to Joe Spinell's performance, kind of emotional.
It really, like, went too far. You know, watching that movie, you really felt like the killing scenes were really protracted and really brutal and really grim. When that movie came out, it was so controversial. You know, a lot of women were protesting it because this idea that it was misogynistic, of course. You know, it's like all these movies get this label of being misogynistic because the victims are primarily women.
I don't feel like the film's misogynistic at all. As a matter of fact, I feel as a woman, it really represents a realism to me. It's like a cathartic experience in a way because women live in that sort of world every day where we have to be hyper aware of who's around us and what could happen.
Maniac ends with a group of women taking brutal revenge on the killer. Today, many horror fans and film scholars consider it a classic. But in the 80s, Maniac helped set off a moral panic.
Horror became a dirty word, I think, in the late 70s, early 80s, and I think that the reason for that was the explosion of slasher movies.
A new breed of shriek merchants has exploited the once honorable genre of the terror film.
It was a very cheap form of horror entertainment, and those slasher films got a lot of bad press for brutalizing women, for violence, for the gore. And the people making legitimate horror films were afraid that they were going to be tainted by the legacy of a lot of these slasher knockoffs.
I think a lot of people have the wrong idea. They identify these films with earlier thrillers like Psycho, or even a more recent film like Halloween, which we both like. These films aren't in the same category. These films hate women.
But don't you find that in a really effective horror movie, blood stains the critic's eyes? Like, once you get blood in your eyes, you can't wash it out. They can't see anything else other than the kill. And they also feel like if they like the movie, that they're endorsing that for real, or that kind of violence. So most often, those reviews just become a soapbox. We're like, look, I'm a good person, I'm a good person. I don't like this sort of thing. But the truth is, we love it. It's like, it's the enjoying fantasy, enjoying a scary story. It's like, it's no different from Grimm's fairy tales.
The slasher films celebrate the female character because they're the final girls. The people who survive the slasher movies are the final girls. And that's who you identify with, and that's the smart one. The women are the ones who are smart. It's the sex-crazed guys bringing their girlfriends to have sex that, you know, get slaughtered.
Most of the feminists who were against horror were not really watching these films or analyzing them. You know, they were just sort of like, pornography is bad, horror films are bad, you know, so they weren't actually engaging with the genre.
These women in danger films all really boil down to just one same image, one disturbing image, a woman screaming in abject terror.
Usually it's the people who don't actually know anything about the topic that are the loudest complainers about it.
And unfortunately, the audiences that go to them don't seem to like women too much either.
In the 80s, the New York Times conducted a poll with theater goers to find out who were seeing these slasher films, and they found out that 45% of the audience was made up of adolescents. 55% of that audience was women.
Maniac, its slasher cousins, and the Reagan assassination attempt triggered a crackdown on realistic violence and gore. By 1984, the golden age of slasher films was over. But audiences still wanted their scares, so filmmakers created a new kind of monster.
Okay, show her. Well, is it a good guy or not? It is. It is.
A good guy! One of the first experiences of horror was Child's Play.
Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end. Heidi-ho.
When I first saw that, I was about 4 or 5. So it's just this little doll, and it was cute, and then all of a sudden it just came alive. And it's just always those moments where the camera is moving. But you don't, it's kind of the POV of the doll that just like, it just drove me crazy. And I can be honest, to this day, I'm still affected by that.
Nobody believes you about Chucky unless you start telling the truth. Right now, they're going to take you away from me.
It's about a mother trying to hold her family together to defend her son against this, you know, against the charges of being a murderer. I mean, a 7-year-old boy, horrible. And the boy may be mad. He keeps insisting that his doll is talking to him.
Come on, Chucky, say something. Tell me. Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end. Heidi-ho. Ha ha ha.
To me, horror is always about violating the sacred. Take a child, something that we all look at and coo over and look after and dote on, and make them the most evil out there. And a child's toy is sacred too. These are things we grow up with, and you basically cast horror's black shadow over all this sacred, righteous stuff.
You stupid bitch! You filthy slut! Did you with me?
In the 1980s, advertisers had started to target children directly.
Brought to you exclusively by Play Pals, makers of Good Guys and other fine toys.
It's like children had become these little consumerist monsters who could, you know, coerce their parents into getting them more and more stuff that they didn't need.
Well, what do you think?
I want a good guy to go with it.
I know you do, Andy, but I didn't know about it in time this month to save up for it.
I remember my mother telling me a crazy story about fighting someone in a dark alley for a Cabbage Patch Kid.
I got my doll! I got my doll!
We can see this line between the direct-to-children as consumers advertising on the one hand and the potential consequences of what that brings into the home on the other.
I was asking for them to create a doll that had never been created before, to do things on film that had never been done before. This is a breath before CGI. There was no way out. It was all in camera, live or die. We built the apartment up, the apartment set, 4 feet off the ground. We punched holes through the set behind the doll so you couldn't see the wires directly behind it. I mean, I used every trick in the book to try to maintain the illusion that the doll was alive and moving.
Hi, it's me, Chucky.
What do you think?
I mean, think about it. You're being chased by something this big with a knife. You know, I mean, you know, how do you sell that? Well, didn't we?
Chucky is a piece of horror history. Chucky's face sits on that Horror Hall of Fame board, right next to the guy in the hockey mask, right next to the Michael Myers mask, Freddy's glove. He's in there.
Child's Play was violent, but no one would mistake it for the grim realism of Maniac. Chucky was following a trail blazed by one of the most famous characters in the history of horror, Freddy Krueger.
You know, Nightmare on Elm Street came out in 1984, and I remember seeing that movie, and I was so excited about the fact that, oh, there's a new twist to this subgenre, that now the rules of any sort of world don't apply.
In part 2, we'll see how A Nightmare on Elm Street brought slashers back from the grave.
Freddy is in the imagination of the person he's haunting. And the imagination is larger than life.
Dive into the psychosexual darkness of Candyman.
You have to be able to live with the scares, and you have to be able to make people talk about it long after you've gone.
Watch as Scream turns the genre inside out.
I thought I was in a documentary about a serial killer, and they're playing this, you know, for laughs.
The Silence of the Lambs makes grisly horror respectable.
Love your suit.
And 21st century anxiety leads to the no-holds-barred terror of Saw and Hostel.
People who don't see these films take them way more seriously than the people who do.
We wanted to make something that was super scary, and we inadvertently become known as the kings of torture porn.